Good afternoon, my name's Clare Williams and I work for the British Equestrian Trade Association. Welcome to today's episode as part of our Summer of Safety, and today we're looking at yard safety, something a lot of us probably don't think a lot about until something goes wrong. This is part of our summer-wide focus on all matters safety, from hats and body protectors to tech, biosecurity, horse health and feed safety. Today, I'm delighted to welcome Clare Gabriel from Angel Risk. She's a health and safety professional with over 30 years experience, and having worked in a range of industries, including utilities and charities, she now specialises in equestrian safety, looking at site risk assessment, safety management and event risk. And believe me, for a lot of people, health and safety is really boring, but it's not, is it, Clare? It's really interesting.
It's not boring at all, Claire. It's very necessary, and ultimately we're here to help people understand what can go wrong, but what we can do very quickly to put things right and make sure they don't go wrong in the first place.
Yeah, exactly. And as I say, I think it's something that when something goes wrong, you suddenly realise what you did wrong, but we want to stop people getting to that point.
Hindsight, I think, particularly with horses, is a really good thing. And also things happen very quickly. And, before you know it, something's gone wrong. And afterwards we think, oh, if only.
Exactly. Because you've got looking at your background, I know you used to work in water. I remember the first time I met you and you just moved over to the Pony Club and you were absolutely delighted that finally you didn't have to deal with water and other bits and you could now
sewage, Claire, sewage.
Yeah, okay. And now I know you do a lot in racing, but you do a lot of training as well, don't you?
I do. I'm very lucky that my passion has now become my my work, and I've had horses all my life, and sort of the first thing I did was ride the ironing board as a small child, and now I've turned, as I say, I've turned my passion into work, and I'm very fortunate to work with the equestrian industry across the board. I've worked, you mentioned the Pony Club, I've worked with the Jockey Club, I'm working with equestrian insurers. So really, I wake up every day and have to pinch myself.
I know, it's great, isn't it? I have to say, working for Beta means that your interest becomes your life, and it is fascinating, the
Really?
different aspects. Yeah, really.
Very much so.
Yeah. So looking at yard safety, what sort of areas do you think people should really think about when they're looking at their yard in terms of making things a bit safer?
I think the problem that we often have is the yard is almost an extension of our home. Whether it's a livery yard out the back of somebody's house or even a livery yard that we have to travel to, we become very, very familiar with it. We go there every day, several times a day. And actually we start not to see things that can happen. So there are a few things I'd like to talk about this morning that I think we can just focus on, that I think will make a really big difference to people and horse safety on the yard.
So the first one, things that, you're right, you do take your yard for granted. It just does become an extension. So what sort of areas would you look at first? Say, one of the biggest risks, I suppose, would be fire. And it's not something that we ever want to think about, but it is a huge risk. And I know you said something to me the other week and I suddenly thought, oh my God, that's true.
Fire is huge, and again, I think very often we take it absolutely for granted. It's one of those things, and there have been some terrible horse fires in the last few years where stables have caught fire, horses have been lost. We don't ever want to think about that, but there are very few things we can do just to improve the safety around the yard. Basic things, Claire. Smoking, absolute no. Smoking, horse hay, shavings, it's something that shouldn't be allowed. What we don't want is any of our liveries sneaking around the back for a quick cigarette, because that cigarette butt thrown carelessly down could start a fire. So that's something to think about. We've had some very hot weather recently with the sunshine. Let's think about glass and glass bottles and things that may possibly reflect sunlight that could cause fire. Even windows. Sometimes we have to sort of think about windows, whether it's on stables, whether it's on tack rooms. Have a look at your windows and when you're stood in them, see where the sun comes in, because we ourselves at home recently had a situation where we went into our office and could smell burning, and the sun had come through the window and had melted a plastic bottle on the windowsill. So, these are just little things that you may not think about, but can cause a fire when we have those flammable things, even sort of crisp packets and discarded bits of paper.
God, I'd never have thought about that, to be honest. That's very true. It just never occurred to me. How many yards do you think would have something like a fire extinguisher?
I think very few, Claire. I think, private. Absolutely. And, it's really interesting. You can buy a fire extinguisher from even now the discount supermarkets. I bought 3 because that's, the sort of person I am. I've got one in my lorry, one in my tack room, one in my house. From a discount supermarket, they were $9.99 each. You can buy them on Amazon. Think about having a fire extinguisher easily accessible, and if you have liveries, put up a little sign, let them know where the fire extinguishers are.
Can you even do this? Look at this.
Put the sign up. Yeah, absolutely. We can have fire points, couple of fire extinguishers dotted around the yard, but equally, let's have one that we can play with, that we can learn how to use it, because that's the other thing. In the event of a fire, in the event of something smouldering, even the muck heap, let's think about how we actually use it.
That's really true, because I know even at work we've got them. We've got one at home as well, because my other half is quite careful. But I actually have never used one. Never had to use one. I think that's really important. Do you have to look for a particular type of fire extinguisher? Because I know there are lots of different types, aren't there?
There are lots of different types. I mean, if you've got sort of sink and cooking facilities, or even a little stove or something in your tack room for your liveries, if you've got sort of an area that people can sit in out of the rain, you'd probably want to think about something like a fire blanket, which again, you can buy them very inexpensively from Amazon, and those are very good if something catches fire on a hob or something like that. The other one is a foam extinguisher, which you can use, but equally for electrical fires, we should be looking at powder. So a powder fire extinguisher, those are a little bit more difficult to get hold of, but again, they're probably 15 quid. And if you've got liveries and you're supplying, cooking facilities, or even a kettle, or even for the clippers, a powder fire extinguisher and then a water fire extinguisher, those are the most common ones to find. Never ever use those on an electrical fire, because that can cause an electric shock. But powder and water, if you've got shavings that have caught fire, hay that have caught fire, and equally most yards have a good hose pipe. Have you got a good hose pipe that, if necessary, can reach the stables, reach your hay store? Because that, if nothing else, is a really good backup.
And back to the fire extinguishers, how often, because I know at work we have to get ours inspected every so often. So I mean, it's great having a fire extinguisher, but it sits there for 5 years, and then when you need it, how often should you be checking them? Do they have a use-by date on them?
They will usually have a use-by date, and I looked at mine earlier, and it does have a 5-year expiry date on it. So, if you're spending 30, 40 quid on some fire extinguishers, they're there. It's reassuring. If you have to replace them every 5 years, that's not a big expense. That's a few bags of food.
And you mentioned kettles. So in terms of, I know, again, at work, we have to get everything in the office electrical PAT tested. I doubt most people would do that in their own situation. But what are the sort of risks? Because we all have either a kettle, probably where we shouldn't have, a radio. We've got, I know we've got a tack room with a washing machine in it.
Right.
And then you've got your clippers. So lots of places where electricity is involved and things can go wrong.
Electricity is quite a big one. And again, I think for those of us with a yard out the back, I would recommend that every couple of years you have an electrician just come and check your plugs, check your lights, and make sure that they're okay. It won't cost a huge amount of money, but ultimately you want to know that the safety devices on your electrical system, because you'll have a fuse box, and what you'll also have is a current device that, should there be a problem with something you plug in, it'll flick everything off. And rather than just reset it and off you go again, I think it's worth making sure that there's nothing wrong, because, it would be a terrible tragedy if a horse or a person got electrocuted because all we've done is reset the current device, the residual current device, the trip switch on the electrical system, and not got it checked out. So I think every couple of years, I think all horse people really should be checking their electrical system. They're filthy dirty. It's dusty. Dust gets in, it can stop things working as they should. And then with regards to equipment that we're plugging in, I would hope that most people have their clippers serviced at least once a year. So if you're sending your clippers away to be serviced, they'll obviously look at the electrical safety. Also think about your kettle. It's very common for us our kettle to go wrong in the kitchen at home and think, oh, do you know what that'll do for the yard? Let's take the old tired kettle down the yard. Perhaps we need to rethink this. I mean, to be absolutely honest, not many people have been electrocuted on kettles, but they can start fires, going back to what we were talking about earlier. So don't always use the oldest bit of kit you can find to plug in at your yard, because fire is probably the greater risk than electrocution with things like kettles, washing machines and radios.
And that's so true, because I know that's exactly what we do, is you do things, and you can buy a kettle for a tenner.
You can, you really can.
So it's a very false economy. And the other thing that I know we found was the kettle had been plugged in, or actually in this case it was a radio. And then when we looked at the wires, we do occasionally get rats. The rats had started to chew the cord. That surely must be another big risk.
Again, it's a fire risk, Claire. And certainly if you've got a washing machine plumbed in, how often do we pull that out? Rats and mice, they love plastic. There's something about it that they absolutely love. And you know yourself, they'll eat plastic bags, they'll eat, wellies, they'll eat all sorts. And so again, it's a really good idea, if you've got a livery yard or if it's your own yard, put it in the diary that wet winter's morning when you can't ride. Let's just pull the washing machine out. Let's just check all the cables on things. Put it in your diary once or twice a year, just to have a little check on a day you can't ride. Time well spent in my book.
Yeah, hugely. And you're right. There's always something else we could be doing that we don't. Looking at other parts of safety, one of the obvious ones for us from Beta is the safety clothing that you wear. Now, let's be honest, it's not so, we're all really good at riding and putting on body protectors or hats and making certain we're wearing the right gear, but all too often those accidents happen when we're on the ground rather than in the saddle. And I know a lot of us, I'm a big believer in gloves, but also proper footwear. Never mind hats and body protectors.
Claire, I go to a lot of events. You and I both go to a lot of events. And my biggest heart-stopping moment is seeing people around horses in soft shoes. I was at a very large event last year, and a competitor's horse trod on the groom. She had trainers on and the horse was studded. And it was horrible. But at home, again, if we've got a yard out the back, how easy is it to nip out in just our trainers, or worse, Claire, this time of year, flip-flops? I think in social media, periodically, we do see some cracking photos of people who've been trodden on, either in trainers or flip-flops. And for me, footwear is a biggie. It doesn't take 2 minutes just to put your jumper boots on. It's not the best look, is it, with your shorts and your sun top? But do you know what? Oh, absolutely. If the horse treads on your toe, even turning the horse out, picking its feet out and it jams its foot down because there's a fly, your toes are underneath. Yeah. But as you say, gloves, even hats. I was delighted to see Charlotte leading her horse up for the Olympics in the trot up wearing a hat. And there was a load of chatter about it as well, which I thought, tagged you, I think, Claire, in it as well. Yeah. It was excellent because, we all get terribly complacent. we're virtually an extension of our home, or at home. We know our horse is back to front and inside out, and we don't think things will go wrong. So wearing the right equipment is really important. When we're lunging, wear gloves. Even if you're leading a young horse, if you're taking it out for a walk or whatever, wear gloves. I think it's really important. And as daft as it sounds, and people will, throw their hands up, I'm not wearing my hat. Think about when it's appropriate to wear your hat. If you've got a young horse and you're picking its feet out, this time of year, there's flies about, it can kick you in the head, and you only have one head.
Yeah, and I've been there because that happened to me. In that instance, a hat may not have helped me because of where she hit me, but still, and I think that's the key, horses are flight animals. No matter how reliable, how much we know our horse, if they see something, or as you say, there's a fly, or their worst enemy suddenly appears behind your shoulder, they're not going to think, oh, mum's in the way, I better be careful. They are going to react. And I know, and I think it's that especially turning out for me is a big thing, is don't get into bad habits so that you might put somebody else in a bad situation. So it's all very well you knowing you can get to the gate and just drop the head collar and let the horse go. But if you're asking somebody else to turn your horse out for you and they don't do that, then you're putting them in a dangerous position because the horse doesn't know. They do what they're taught to do. So that's why, as you say, perhaps particularly with young horses, where you don't know or you can't predict their behaviour, then take those extra measures. And yeah, it's all too easy when you're at home and you think, oh, I just want to go and check the horses.
Absolutely.
To leave your flip-flops or your sandals on, because you might think, oh, I won't go in the field, and then you do.
And then you do.
Yeah, and that's when the trouble starts. Yeah, it's just not worth
it. And the injuries are horrific. They are horrific. I've seen people, loading horses, talking about handling the horses, loading them, people with knots in ropes and things like that, and their hands getting shredded. These injuries can take a long time for us to heal. And it's a moment's slip. And as we said right at the top of this session, we're talking about the hindsight of if only, and just getting back into good habits around our horses is something really important. And it takes a moment. And health and safety has quite a bad sort of press. People laugh and think we're doing things for the sake of doing it, but actually there's always a really good reason behind it. And we do it to look after people. So I think that's important. And, as you said, Claire, handling young horses, if you're looking after horses for other people, for example, you want to know that horse is well behaved for the person looking after them. So again, get into those good habits, and wear the right equipment, turn them out correctly, turn them to face yourself rather than just drop the head collar. And because you could get a kick in the head or the chest or the leg and, put you out of action a long time.
And as you say, it's all about risk assessment. So we do it probably in our professional lives all the time, look at the risk, assess it, and then try and reduce that risk. But with our horses, again, they're part of the family and you don't put that extra thought into it. And it's all too easy to get careless, and then before you know it, that accident happens. So, and when an accident does happen, that's when you need to have the tools available to try and sort the accident out. So by this I mean first aid kit, and we are all brilliant at having really good equine first aid kits, but I don't know how many of us actually have a first aid kit for us.
It's crazy, isn't it? I think it's one of those situations where if we go into the average tack room, you will have the most spectacular horse first aid kits. They'll have everything. If you cut your hand open, you'll probably find yourself wrapping it with a bit of Gamgee and some vet wrap. Yeah. So again, another little tip is consider having, even a sort of we used to have them in large ice cream boxes, didn't we, with a green sticker on. But think about having a good first aid kit, because it is useful if something goes wrong and you do need something very quickly to hand. Yeah, all right, we've got horse first aid kits, but actually it's not a lot of effort to get some good plasters, some bandages, some we've all got antibacterial wipes and things like that now. Have a good first aid kit in your tack room for your liveries, for yourself. It's just a good discipline to have, and pop a sign on it, and let people know where it is. Because the other thing, Claire, you mentioned is if things do, there we go, there's our first aid point. Yeah, everybody's used to seeing it. I think the other thing is that nowadays there are lots and lots of free courses available on first aid. Do we know what to do in the event of an emergency? And you and I, Claire, have worked with organisations that put these things up for free, and we know you can get hold of some excellent online first aid courses that people can do that gives you the basics. What happens if somebody's knocked out, somebody's bleeding badly? These are the things that we even get something in your eye. These are the things that we need to know what to do. And a little bit of time, again, a winter's evening, a rainy day, we can sit on our laptops and do a first aid kit in, an hour.
And in fact, we posted one earlier this week from the First Aid Cooperative. They've got a fantastic online first aid manual that's searchable. So if you probably wouldn't necessarily do it in the face of an accident, but if you want to do some homework, and they do a really good free basic first aid course, which, as you say, you can sit online and get it done in half an hour, which I think is brilliant.
It's just a skill everybody needs. Two other little prompts I think that are really useful. One is the St. John Ambulance app. That's really excellent. I've known livery yards where people have had cardiac arrests. So being able to know what to do. So the St. John's Ambulance First Aid app is really excellent. And the other one that we should all have, I think, as horse riders are the What 3 Words app.
Just about to say that, absolutely. Yeah.
So we can easily be found, Claire. It's invaluable. All the emergency services use them now, and it's there and it's useful. You just give them the words that you've got and they can find you.
Yeah. And does it work? Could you have those words posted in the tack room as well?
Absolutely. And I've been to event centres now, and they've got those What 3 Words on boards, so that in the event of an accident you can just read them out. Yeah, absolutely right, you can.
In case, like in our yard, we have really poor phone reception, or no Wi-Fi. So sometimes you just need to think, if I am somewhere where there's no decent phone reception, what to do. And in a certain extent, if you are on a commercial yard, the yard owner should be doing this. They should have things like first aid kits and all of these procedures in place.
They absolutely should, Claire, because the chances are on a commercial yard, you'll have employees, and then all of a sudden, health and safety law comes to play. So it's a very different scenario than you and I having our horses out the back, or a small livery yard with 5 or 6 horses. But even so, our standards should still be good, because if we let our standards drop, that's when accidents happen.
Yeah, exactly. And another area as well, because we were looking at it on our yard, is we talked about pests before and rats, and the fact that, in the country, it's almost unavoidable. Certainly rats quite often, but also just think about the rubbish that you leave that might be on the yard, or either is blowing around the yard, or may attract rodents and other pests.
Absolutely, Claire. I think that's one that we do forget. I mean, unfortunately, with horses, we do generate an awful lot of waste, whether it's feed bags, whether it's poultices out of manky feet. There always seems to be a feed bag full of waste, baler twine. And with that, I'm afraid, does come things like spilled food. And with that comes the pests. But equally, as you say, unless we're diligent about it and we have somewhere that we can put our waste and keep it tidily, it can blow about, it can scare horses. And you know what they're like. They'll walk past something 10 times, no problem at all. A bag will blow and the horse will go, have a big shy or worse. So, just around the horse safety, we were talking earlier about becoming complacent. Have a look around your yard. What's lying about? Are your tools placed nicely? Because again, if your tools fall over and a horse stands on a muck picker or something, you could have an injured foot. Every now and again, it doesn't hurt just to have a real good old look round. Baler twine that's just hanging around. Horses do the most ridiculous things and can get caught up. Are your fences, just a quick look round the fences to make sure that they're all tucked in and neat and tidy. in our book, cleanliness is next to godliness, isn't it? And, you know, making sure that rubbish is out the way, and just having a slight awareness. You mentioned pests, Claire, and I think a lot of people do know, but rats carry a very nasty disease called leptospirosis. We might know it as Weil's disease. And rats they wee all the time. There's no polite way of talking about it. And in their wee, you have this bacterial infection called Weil's disease, and it can make people very poorly. Years ago, I was aware of a farmer who caught it and was really very, very sick and was in hospital for quite a long time. So again, you know, just familiarize yourselves. It can cause flu-like symptoms. If you've been round the horse, you've got a cut on your fingers, or, you know, you've got some abrasions, and you've been, you know, moving straw around, or you've been tidying up the tack room and there's a chance there could have been rats, and you start to feel a bit poorly, it's just worth having a chat with your doctor, because you never know, you might have picked up Weil's disease.
Gosh, I never knew that. There we go.
Yeah.
Never knew that.
Every day's a school day.
Oh, I'll tell you what. No, it's very true. I think there's so many things we take for granted, but we're just not aware of the risks we might be placing ourselves in, which is fine, but those around us, we don't want to put those in similar risks.
No, not at all.
So the key bits are sort of my take-home messages is fire, go and buy a fire extinguisher.
Or two.
Yeah, or two or three. Keep an eye on your wires and on your electrical appliances. Make certain they're safe. You wouldn't use them in the house if they weren't safe.
No.
So why use them around your nearest and dearest horses? And then just start good practice. If in doubt, put the hat on if you think they're going to be silly. And even if they're not, you never know when they might be. And just check that you've got that first aid kit, not just for your horse, but for you as well.
I think that's perfect. Sums it up beautifully, Claire.
Thank you so much, Claire. I know I've found that really interesting, and I'm sure other people will. And it's just so it's just so important not to take things for granted and be prepared. So thank you very much.
My absolute pleasure. Thank you.